The Iron Vultures, a feared biker gang, rumbled through the empty streets of a small Texas town. Their leader, Connor Raven Hayes, rode at the front, his sharp eyes scanning the road ahead. He had lived a rough life, filled with mistakes and regrets, but on the road, none of that mattered. The afternoon sun burned hot, making the asphalt shimmer. Dust rose from their tires as they sped forward, engines growling like hungry beasts. The town was silent, almost abandoned, except for the distant hum of cicadas in the dry air. Then, a sound broke through the roar of the motorcycles, a faint whimper. Connor's instincts kicked in. He raised his fist, signaling the gang to stop. Tires screeched as the bike skidded to a halt. The sudden silence was eerie. In the middle of the cracked road lay a German shepherd, barely breathing. Its fur was stained with blood, its chest rising and falling in weak, uneven breaths. Connor swung off his bike and approached cautiously. The dog's eyes flickered open, locking onto his. There was pain, fear, and something else. A plea. A desperate call for help. Then, Connor saw it, a small blinking camera attached to the dog's collar. Without thinking, he pressed play. And what he saw changed everything. The gang skidded to a stop, dust swirling around their tires. The roar of engines faded, leaving an eerie silence in the air. Connor's sharp eyes locked onto something ahead, a German shepherd lying motionless on the cracked asphalt. Its chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, its fur stained with streaks of blood. For a second, no one moved. The dog's body twitched slightly, struggling to lift its head, but it was too weak. Connor swung off his bike, his boots crunching against the hot pavement. The gang watched in silence as he stepped closer, his usual hardened expression shifting. The dog's eyes flickered open, locking onto his. Pain and exhaustion filled them, but beneath that, something deeper, a silent plea. Connor knelt beside it, scanning the wounds. Some were fresh, others smeared with dirt as if the dog had been running for miles before collapsing. Then, something caught his attention. A small black device strapped to its collar, a camera, still blinking red. Connor's fingers hesitated before pressing the button. The tiny screen flickered to life, showing a grainy, shaky video. At first, it was just the blur of fast movement. Then, a car came into view, black, speeding down the road. The dog was running beside it. A gunshot rang out. The camera jolted. The screen filled with chaos, screeching tires, masked men leaning out of a car window, bullets flying. Connor's jaw tightened. The footage shook violently before cutting off. Static. He exhaled slowly, his grip tightening around the camera. This dog wasn't just injured. It had survived something deadly. And whatever happened to its owner? It wasn't over yet. Connor pressed the button on the camera. The tiny screen flickered, and the video began to play. At first, the footage was shaky, the camera bounced as the dog ran. The scene was chaotic, blurry shapes moving fast. Then, the picture cleared. Keanu Reeves was behind the wheel of a black SUV. His face was tense, focused, gripping the steering wheel. The dog ran beside the car, keeping pace. Then, gunfire erupted. A black sedan swerved into the frame, tires screeching. Masked men leaned out of the windows, rifles aimed at Keanu's vehicle. Muzzle flashes lit up the screen. Keanu shouted something, his voice urgent, but the sound was drowned out by the gunshots. The SUV jerked violently, swerving left and right, trying to escape. The dog suddenly dashed forward, leaping toward the attackers. Then, the camera jolted. The picture blurred, flipping upside down. The last clear image was the black sedan speeding forward, one of the gunmen aiming directly at Keanu. Then, static. Connor stared at the screen, his pulse pounding in his ears. The video had cut off. For a moment, no one spoke. Rick, standing behind him, exhaled sharply. "Tell me I didn't just see Keanu Reeves getting shot at." Connor didn't answer. His mind was racing. The SUV was gone. The gunman had ambushed him. And now, only the dog remained. Something wasn't right. This wasn't a random attack. Keanu had been targeted. And if those men were willing to hunt down one of the most famous actors in the world, then this was bigger than any of them realized. Connor clenched his jaw and looked down at the dog. Its breathing was uneven, but its eyes stayed locked on him. It had fought to protect Keanu. And now, it was the only one left to tell the story. Rick shifted nervously. "Cops are probably already looking for him, man. If we keep this dog, we're putting a target on our backs." Connor still didn't move. He watched the red light on the camera blink, recording, waiting. He had a choice. Leave the dog and walk away. Or step into something dangerous. But deep down, he knew there was no choice at all. Connor stood up, his voice firm. "We're not walking away." The distant wail of sirens cut through the heavy silence. Flashing lights would be here soon. The police were closing in. Rick, standing near his bike, looked around frantically. His voice was sharp with panic. "Raven, we gotta go. The cops'll pin this on us." The rest of the gang shifted uneasily, exchanging nervous glances. No one wanted trouble with the law. They were bikers, not killers. But Connor didn't move. He was still kneeling beside the injured German shepherd. The dog's fur was sticky with blood, but its chest still rose and fell, weak but alive. Connor reached out and ran a hand over its matted coat, feeling the heat of its body, the faint tremble of exhaustion. Its eyes met his. There was no mistaking it, pleading, desperate, full of pain. But there was something else, too. Trust. The dog didn't know who he was. It had no reason to believe he was safe. But in that moment, it was looking at him like he was its last hope. Connor swallowed hard. Something in his chest tightened. For years, he had told himself he didn't care. About the past. About anyone. But right now, looking at this dog, Keanu Reeves' dog, the only one left behind after the ambush, he felt something he thought he had lost a long time ago. Responsibility. He exhaled and stood up. "We're not leaving him." Rick's head snapped toward him, eyes wide. "What?" Connor ignored him. He bent down, sliding his arms carefully under the dog's body. It let out a weak whimper but didn't fight. With a grunt, Connor lifted it into his arms. Rick took a step forward, voice dropping to a near growl. "Raven, listen to me. The cops are coming. You know what happens if they find us here, with this dog? They'll think we're involved." Connor turned, his jaw tight. "I don't care." Rick stared at him for a second, then swore under his breath. He knew that look, Connor wasn't changing his mind. The sound of sirens grew louder, closing in fast. They had seconds to decide. "Move!" Connor barked. The gang didn't hesitate. Tires screeched as the iron vultures spun their bikes around and took off, dust and smoke rising into the air. Connor jumped onto Rick's bike, still clutching the dog, and they sped off into the night. Behind them, the blue and red lights of the police cars lit up the dark streets, chasing them into the unknown. The gang raced through the dark roads, leaving the flashing police lights behind. The sound of sirens faded, but Connor knew they weren't safe yet. Rick's bike roared as it cut through the winding path, heading toward their hidden garage deep in the woods. The place had been their hideout for years, no cops, no cameras, no unwanted visitors. By the time they arrived, the night was completely still. The only sound was the soft rumble of cooling engines and the faint, uneven breathing of the injured dog in Connor's arms. Connor climbed off the bike, his body tense. The dog was barely hanging on. Its breaths were shallow, its body limp. They didn't have much time. "Get me the med kit," Connor ordered. One of the gang members, Drew, ran inside and came back with a box. Connor carefully laid the dog down on an old workbench, brushing dirt from its fur. The gang stood around in silence. None of them had expected this night to go like this. Rick crossed his arms, still out of breath. "Tell me this was worth it." Connor didn't answer. Instead, he pulled the camera off the dog's collar and turned it on. The gang gathered closer as the footage replayed. The attack. The gunfire. The masked men. Connor slowed it down, watching carefully, frame by frame. His sharp eyes scanned every second of the video, looking for something, anything, that could tell him who these men were. Then he saw it. A license plate. The camera had captured a clear shot of the black sedan's rear plate for just half a second before the chaos started. Connor froze the frame. His heart pounded as he zoomed in. The numbers and letters were clear. Behind him, Rick let out a low whistle. "Well, would you look at that?" Connor wasn't done. He kept watching, slowing the footage even more. Then, another detail. A logo on the sedan's door. Faint, almost invisible in the dark. But Connor had seen that symbol before. He narrowed his eyes. It belonged to a private security firm. One that wasn't supposed to operate like this. Connor exhaled sharply. This wasn't just a random attack. Someone wanted Keanu Reeves dead. And now, Connor had the first real clue as to who was behind it. Connor didn't waste time. He had a lead. He grabbed the camera and the frozen image of the license plate and logo and turned to Rick. "We need to run this plate," he said. Rick sighed, already knowing where this was going. "I know a guy." Connor nodded. "So do I." They left the garage, the gang staying behind to watch over the injured dog. Connor and Rick jumped into an old black pickup truck and took off into the night. Their destination? Gizmo, the underground hacker. Gizmo was a ghost. No real name, no known address. He operated out of an abandoned electronics shop on the edge of town. When Connor and Rick pulled up, the place looked deserted. A flickering neon sign above the door read, "Repairs," but the windows were boarded up. Connor knocked twice, then once more. A pattern. A small slot in the door slid open, revealing a pair of tired eyes. "Raven," a voice muttered. "Still alive, huh?" "Let us in, Gizmo," Connor said flatly. The door creaked open, and they stepped inside. The room was cluttered with old computers, wires, and half-built machines. Screens glowed in the dark, displaying security feeds, code, and stock market charts. Gizmo, a wiry man with thick glasses and messy hair, spun his chair around and stretched. "This better be worth my time," he said. Connor placed the camera on the desk and played the footage. Gizmo watched in silence. When the license plate and logo appeared, he paused the video and smirked. "Now that," he said, "is interesting. The search begins." Gizmo's fingers flew over the keyboard, running the plate through databases, some legal, some not. Rick leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Tell me you're finding something." Gizmo frowned. "Yeah, I'm finding something, all right." He turned the screen toward them. The license plate belonged to a black sedan registered to a private security firm. But there was a problem. The company didn't exist. The address listed was fake. The owner's name led nowhere. Every record had been wiped. "This is a ghost company," Gizmo muttered. "A shell. Someone set it up to cover their tracks." Connor clenched his jaw. "Whoever these guys are, they don't want to be found." Gizmo leaned back in his chair. So, what's your next move? Connor didn't hesitate. We find them. Connor and Rick parked a few blocks away, keeping the truck hidden in the shadows. The warehouse loomed in the distance, its metal walls rusted and dented. No guards. No movement. Too quiet. They moved carefully, sticking close to the fence. Rick used bolt cutters to snip through the lock on a side gate. The chain clattered softly as it fell, and they slipped inside. Connor scanned the area. No cameras. No alarms. It felt like a trap, but they were already in. They reached the main entrance, a large metal door slightly ajar. Connor pushed it open, and they stepped inside. The discovery. The warehouse was massive. Stacks of wooden crates, metal shelves, and old machinery lined the walls. Dust floated in the air, illuminated by the dim light from a few flickering bulbs. Rick frowned. What the hell is this place? Connor didn't answer. His eyes were locked on something ahead, a large table covered in papers and photographs. They walked closer. Then they saw them. Photos of Keanu Reeves. Different angles, different locations, someone had been watching him for weeks. There were maps, police reports, and classified documents scattered across the table. Some were stamped confidential. But one file stood out. A thick black folder with a single name on the cover. Target, Keanu Reeves. Rick exhaled. This ain't random, man. This is a hit. Connor flipped open the file. Inside were detailed plans, timestamps, and tactical notes. Whoever had gone after Keanu knew exactly where he'd be, down to the second. Connor's stomach tightened. This wasn't just an attack. Someone had planned to kill him. The ambush. A loud metal clang echoed through the warehouse. Rick spun around. We gotta go. Now. Before they could move, the warehouse doors slammed shut. Footsteps. Multiple. Coming fast. Then, masked men appeared from the shadows, emerging from behind crates and machinery. Guns raised. One of them stepped forward, his voice cold. You shouldn't be here. Connor's fists clenched. They were trapped. The first battle had begun. Back at the hideout, Connor knelt beside the wounded dog, his hands resting gently on its fur. Its breathing was weak, but its eyes never left him. Even now, in pain, the dog trusted him. Connor exhaled, running a hand over its head. This wasn't just about saving a dog anymore. This dog had fought to protect Keanu Reeves and had survived something deadly. Now, it was the only clue they had. Rick stood behind him, arms crossed. We barely made it out of there, he muttered. They'll be coming after us now. Connor didn't look up. His voice was quiet but firm. I won't let them win. He stood, turning to Rick, his jaw tight, fire burning in his eyes. We're bringing them down. Rick exhaled sharply but gave a small nod. The fight was no longer just about a missing man or a wounded dog. This was bigger. A conspiracy that someone had tried to bury. And now, Connor and his crew were right in the middle of it. And they weren't backing down.